Hello, I'm Anthony. Today I want to talk to you about some of the processes I use when I'm comparing plugins from different manufacturers. I've got three different compressors here from IK Multimedia, Waves and Arturia. They're all emulations of the same piece of kit, the UA1176. And the reason I've chosen these particular products is because the interface for these three plugins is almost identical. And so it's really good for demonstration purposes that I can show you exactly the same controls in different plugins behaving differently. That's the whole point. Because what I want to do, if I'm comparing these products together and I want to choose which is the best for a particular purpose, I need to know what the various strengths and weaknesses are. But more importantly, for today's purposes, I need a level playing field. I need to ensure that something like loudness bias doesn't steer me down a particular route and prevent a product from shining just because, for instance, its output level might be lower than a comparable plugin with all other settings being identical. And that's what I'm going to show you today. We've got some good examples of that. The first thing that you want to do is choose what your test environment's going to be. Now, I'm using a single sample for the purposes of today's test. Really important to say, everything that I'm doing today is only going to work for this particular audio file in this particular scenario, but the general principles are important. So I'll drag this audio file out of Media Bay, and the first thing that we need to do is determine what our basic metrics are. So this sample, when played from beginning to end, is going to generate a total integrated loudness. This value here that I'm kind of circling with my mouse, that's the important one. If I get us back to the beginning of the piece and play this entire sample, at the moment my master output is turned down, completely irrelevant. It's got nothing to do with the meter reading. So this meter reading is taking its values before we get to the master output, but everything else in the system, as you can see, is 0 dB everywhere. So it's a completely flat line. So once that sample's played from beginning to end, we've got this total integrated loudness value of minus 19.5 dB. All of the other tests that I'm going to do today need to be really close to that value, to within 0.1 of a dB, so that my ears aren't accidentally steered one way or another, because loud is better. You'll almost always find that you prefer the louder version of two sounds, all other things being equal. So it's really important to make sure that everything's balanced. So that's our totally dry signal with no effects being applied to it at all. So now we bring in the compressor on the same track. And I'm going to use the IK Multimedia one just because it's at the top of the list to provide my effect-based baseline. So now I want this thing, once the signal's been through it, to still be outputting somewhere close to minus 19.5. Now the signal is going through the compressor. You can see about 3 dB of compression there or thereabouts. But once it's finished playing, there you go. The integrated value is at minus 19.5. So it's been through the compressor, some compression's been applied, 4:1 ratio, 12 o'clock on the attack, fast release, really basic, simple parameters for a compressor. I don't want to worry about what they are today. I'm not talking about compression, I'm talking about comparing multiple products. But the important thing is that the integrated value coming out of this box is flat. So now I've got some basic parameters. As you can see, each one of these products has all the same controls: input, output, attack, release, ratio. That's what you want to be playing with. Those are the important values for an 1176. So I've got a minus 30 dB input here and a minus 18.1 output. As you can see, I've already pre-configured the other two with exactly the same values. All of their attacks, releases and ratios are identical. So shouldn't these three products all generate exactly the same output? Well, theoretically, yes, but that's where theory and practice depart, because they don't. The Waves product, I can turn this down now so that I can talk over the top of it, generates the hottest signal. So by the time it gets to the end of it, we're going to have an integrated value louder than the minus 19.5 we had previously. There we are at minus 18.4. And the Arturia is the quietest of the three. And with the signal going through it, don't forget it's got nothing to do with my output level. This meter is before the output level. It's just reading what's coming out of this track, and here you see minus 22.7. So there's a really significant difference in volume between those three before we've even started to look at the products themselves. Just attempting to create some kind of flat playing field has already failed. And that means if I turn this thing up and just let it run for a little bit at regular volume, the Waves product is going to sound much better than the Arturia one. Because it's louder. Well, that's not fair. We need to do something about that. And so you're going to need to start deciding how you're going to bring these things into line. Now, at this point, inevitably, I have to start talking a little bit about actual compressors, but the general principles, once again, still apply to all products. So you need to understand a little bit about what compressors are actually doing. The attack, release, and ratio are the fundamental mechanics of the device itself. They're basically how hard the compressor's working, and the input and output determine how much signal is being fed into the compressor, and then what's the overall master level that we're allowing the unit to output. Well, those two values, whether or not you adjust the input or the output in order to get this level matching, really affect your results, and you need to understand the relative effect of changing either the input or the output. So let's have a chat about that first. I'm going to get the cycle going. I'm going to get this thing playing in the background, turn my output all the way down to 0. So now all three of these products are outputting. It doesn't particularly matter which track you've got soloed because the insert effects, as you can see, they always work. And so we need to do something to figure out how we get to this magic minus 19.5 value when the thing starts from the beginning and plays the sample through once. Oh, by the way, this loudness value is going to flatten out and just become absolutely stable because all the time I'm talking, it's constantly averaging everything it hears. So don't worry about the loudness value at the moment, it's kind of being corrupted. The reason I've pressed play and left them running in the background is because I want you to look at the 3 VU meters. Each one of these plugins will be based on real, actual, live, analog instruments. And depending on the idiosyncrasies of that particular device, they might have had some quirks and features about them. In fact, in the Waves manual, it actually says there's an uneven response to the input knob. That's simply how the device works, and we've modeled it exactly. And you go, okay, I respect that. Ultimately, that's going to be the stuff that I'm interested in. That's going to be what determines whether or not I like one plugin over the other. At the moment, I'm just trying to get this baseline. Let's have a look at the Waves plugin. I need to get its total output down to minus 19.5 before I even start thinking about comparing them. And if it's too hot, I can either turn the input or the output down. I've already determined through some testing earlier that if I turn the input down to minus 32.4, so I've soloed the track, turn my input down to 0, only the Waves is outputting to the Insight meter, and now it's going to run once through. So once it's finished generating its playback, here it is, doing its thing in the background, we're going to get an integrated value, brilliant, minus 19.5. So that's one of my two options. Well, what happened while I was talking, I wasn't particularly looking at the VU meter, but let's just have a look at the VU meter. Much more well behaved now. We've pulled some of those more extreme compressions down, and we're in a very similar kind of range to the IK product. So they're outputting the same level, the same total level, and it appears on the meter that they're both doing the same kind of job. Okay, let's do the Arturia next. Same kind of thing. I'm going to pull the input down. I've already worked out that 39.3 should get us pretty much there. So if I get this thing running now, once it gets to the end, it's going to generate a total integrated loudness of very close to minus 19.5. You do get up to 0.1 variance depending on what the meter will point to this time. Certainly close enough. There's a problem with that though. If I just run it through again and watch the VU meter this time, the Arturia is no longer compressing. So in order to get this device to output the correct output level, it's actually not doing the job anymore. So turning the input level down in this particular case wasn't the answer. If I bring that back up to minus 30, which is where we were with our test harness, with basically our baseline. The IK multimedia is the baseline in minus 13 and minus 30 and minus 18. Well, doing it via the input didn't work because we lost the compression that we were looking for. As you can see, the Arturia is compressing perfectly happily. It's just outputting a signal that's too low. Well, that implies I need to make a change to the output level in order to get this thing normalized. Happily, I've already done that testing, and if I get the output level to minus 14.9 and get it running, then we're going to get very close to the minus 19.5 total output that I'm looking for. Input compression looks great. All of these meters are now being perfectly well behaved. Minus 19.5 on the nose. Get this thing cycling now. So finally, we've got all three of these products in a situation where they're compressing to a very similar extent. All of their controls are visually identical, not done a single thing with the attack, release, or ratio. And with just a little bit of understanding about how the inputs and outputs to these devices work, I've got them normalized to the point where they're all actually generating the same level. So now I can turn this thing up and we'll have a listen to each of the three products one at a time. Really similar. This is what I want. This is the point at which I want to start my experiments. Now I'm going to start listening to the individual plugins themselves and figuring out what those idiosyncrasies are. But at least I've got myself to the position where visually and kind of mathematically, as far as amplitude is concerned, they're all doing the same job. Just before we finish today, there's one more thing that I want to show you that's a very common first step that I'll take when comparing plugins like this, particularly when they're really similar. I'll use channel comparison. So I'll just turn the volume down because we don't need to hear it for the purpose of this. So what you're seeing at the moment here is the Waves product. And I can set up this thing called channel comparison in Cubase, where I get a second track. I'm going to use the Arturia track running in the background. And can you see this little bit of orange at the bottom of the frequency curve? That's telling me that the Arturia compressor is a little bit more bass heavy than the Waves compressor. If I can flip across to them and view it from the perspective of the Arturia product, and now you can see that the Waves product is a little bit treble heavy. So we've immediately got some visual indications of the different colors that these compressors are bringing. Now, once again, I can't stress enough that your ears are your ultimate judge, but particularly in this really low frequency range, anything below maybe 30 or 40 hertz, it becomes increasingly difficult to hear this stuff. This is energy. We switch back to the Waves product. This orange that you see here is energy that's contributing to your total output, your loudness level that you can't hear. And so one of the things that I might do before I did anything else on this is put a little bit of low cut on these tracks to pull some of that 20 and 30 hertz stuff away, and maybe recalibrate my products again so that I've taken that bias away, because that's actually detracting from Arturia's kind of net global contribution. If there's energy down there that you can't hear that's contributing to the total loudness, it means it's a little bit quieter than it should be. Bit of low cut, throw that bass rubbish away that you can't hear anyway, and then rebalance them, and it'll give it an extra couple of maybe 0.2, 0.3 of a dB of a boost when it's comparing with the other products. So there's just some really basic, simple stuff that you can do with these analysis graphs before you even start using your ears, before you even start thinking about actually comparing these products together. Hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. If you did, please hit like. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.